Hi, and thank you for checking in to the Daily Dose for Spiritual Growth. It is Thoughtful Thursday, and we are continuing on with the theme this week of spiritual gifts. Now, earlier in the week, I think a couple times, we've actually read through the list. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It lists out numerous gifts of the Spirit that are available to believers as the Holy Spirit chooses to give them out. Now, today I want to take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about the gift of speaking in tongues. Now, as an Assemblies of God church, a Pentecostal, a charismatic church, we not only believe in the gifts of the Spirit, we not only believe that they're evident and that they're effective and fruitful today, but we prayerfully want to use them to further God's kingdom. And that includes the gift of speaking in tongues. But what is that? Well, it's first listed in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. In verse 1, it says, when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. Wouldn't that have been so cool to see what that looked like? Verse 4 says, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. But let's see what happens next. In verse 5, it says, now they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard this sound, a crowd came together. They heard it and they gathered. They wanted to see what was going on. They came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our native language? Here is God, through the Holy Spirit, filled these people with his presence and also chose to give the gift of speaking in tongues. We see here recorded in Acts 2 that it was actually in human languages. It was actually languages unknown to the speaker, but known to different hearers of the language. Interesting. Is that always how the gift of tongues is? No, it's not. If you go forward into 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 2, it says this, for anyone, and this is Paul speaking, for anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to people, but to God. Indeed, no one understands them. They utter mysteries by the Spirit. Isn't that interesting? That God at his own disposal chooses to give us this gift of tongues, and he chooses to give it in the way that he sees fit for what will be beneficial for edifying the body of believers, which is what it did in Acts, or for glorifying God the Father, which is we see further in 1 Corinthians. This gift is for those two purposes. Speaking in tongues is to edify, which means to encourage, to spur one another on in the faith. It's to edify the church, which we talked about on Sunday. The church is like a body made of many members as we work together. So partly speaking in tongues is to edify other believers, to encourage them as they run the race of faith. But also, as we see in 1 Corinthians, it's to glorify God. It's a special intimate relationship between you and the Father, a conversation that is had. We're not even knowing mentally, your spirit is speaking forth the wisdom and the glory of God in a way that he understands. It's a precious gift. Is that a gift that God has given you? Have you been filled with the Holy Spirit in a way in which you have the gift of speaking in tongues? If you have it, it's not meant for just you. Use it. Pray over people in tongues. Edify the body. Glorify God as you use it during worship. But use your gift to accomplish those two goals. Praying for you today as you think about your spiritual gifts and seek the Father to reveal to you what gifts he has given. Thank you so much for coming today. We hope to see you again tomorrow for another Daily Dose for Spiritual Growth.